Doobity boo, boobity boo, boobity boo, ba ba da ba ba da. Okay, we should be live. Hello, you glorious Goddo people. Assume you can hear me. I'm just going to wait for a moment to make sure that I get some sort of thing. But hi, if you can hear me, say hi to me, because Mikey's not with us right now. At least I don't think he's with us. So it's just me, and I'm having to use his setup. How is everybody? Welcome to tonight's stream, brought to you by Canopy Games. My name is Jan, and we're working in conjunction, in partnership, that's the word, with Go Goddo Jam. And if you want the Go Goddo Jam, yeah, you can see me. Awesome. I'm going to give you the link to the jam that we're doing with Redefined Game Dev and a whole bunch of Goddo partners, many of whom you'll have heard of, and I really think you should check it out. I am a little bit jittery and out of it. You may have noticed my energy is a bit weird. I will settle down. I've been packing my house all day. I'm quite tired. I also had to walk to the nearest town, which is a mile away, and then back with some things. But I have my coffee, and coffee is my friend. Okay. Hi to Rotterick, hi to Spectre, hi to Colin, hi to everybody. Let's start by talking about today's theme. I want to talk to you a little bit about the magic of grid maps. And if you don't know what a grid map is a 3D tile map. If you don't know what a tile map is a way of painting a 2D level. So you get a bunch of assets and you say, okay, I want this tile and this little quadrant, and this tile and this little quadrant. And the engine will say, okay, this is one object and it's laid out like this in this little grid, and it works. A grid map works in a very similar way. So let's start with a demo of a grid map. And to do that, I'm going to fire up my Goddo. And let's move that over here. And you know what? Why don't we share my screen? Boop. That should do it. Let's just check if that's come across. And we're going to start a brand new project. And standard thing. For the purpose of this demonstration, I'm going to use the asset pack we made, the dungeon kit. Not because I'm trying to do any kind of hard sell, but because it's designed specifically for a grid map, so it seems perfect. So let's paste that in there. Great. So let's take a look at what we have. I have a bunch of assets, including building tiles and props and a few particles, but specifically I want these building tiles. I wish we could set up a tile in a grid map for multiple mesh instances. Yes, and I will talk a little bit about the grid maps are great for certain things, and they're not great at other things, and it's important to know when to use them. But before we get into that, let's talk about what they are. So if I go over to my dungeon assets, I have a bunch of pre-made meshes. And we have a bunch of different floors, and some of them have stairs on them, a bunch of different walls and doorways and some corridor pieces. Each of these has a mesh, a static body, and a collision. If we look at the documentation for a grid map, which is... Oh, I closed it. That was clever of me. Let's just do a search for it under search help. Thank you, grid map. Great. You'll notice that we can zoom in on the text a little bit. Oh, I can't zoom in on it. Fine. I'm not going to zoom in on it. A grid map is a collection of cells, blah, 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 blah. There's a bit I was looking for. You know what? I'm just going to tell you what it is. I'm not even going to read it. I'm just going to tell you. A grid map can contain the mesh, the collision, and navigation data. You can, in theory, place navigation data just like you can with a tile map or an auto tile, and plug the cells together, and they'll all bake into one navigation mesh. I have never got that working. It's incredibly fiddly. There is another way of making a navigation mesh work, which I will share with you a little later. Let's take a look. Each tile has to be a single mesh. Yes, it does. If you do not use this specific structure, and by this specific structure I mean a single mesh with a single static body and a single collision shape, it will not work. It just won't convert. You can't put in, for example, street lights with working Omni lights. The Omni light just won't appear. You'll have to put that in manually. So there's a bunch of things you can't do, but what you can do, and here's a good example of one way you can use this, the traditional way, is you get your grid map and you make sure you've got it all set up correctly. This scene is already set up, but I know that each tile is 10 by 10 by 6, or rather 10 by 6 by 10. So, and I've taken it off the center. So all I need to do is just put my floor in and paint a level. Now, I can rotate on the y-axis using S, on the, the x-axis using A, and the z-axis using D. This means that if I'm trying to move my camera, my viewport around, I can't use the default controls. I can't hold right mouse button and use WSAD. I'm using an English keyboard, so WSAD is how I move around. That's a little annoying, so just be aware of that. Several times I've accidentally rotated large amounts of level for no reason. But we can create a level and it'll have collision and it'll just work. So that's one thing you can do with them. Let's talk a little bit about why you might want to use a grid map. The first reason you might want to use a grid map is it's quite performant. It's a lot more performant than making a huge level of lots of individual mesh pieces. And the reason for that is kind of related to how Godot uses a multi-mesh. So here's a multi-mesh. Drawing thousands of mesh instance nodes can be slow, since each object is submitted to the GPU and then drawn instantly. A multi-mesh is much faster, as it can draw thousands of instances with a single draw call. Okay, the key here is that your grid map is... My cat is helping. There you go, Caboodle. The key here is that... Hi, Matthias. A grid map is a single object. Okay, so it has one draw call and it has one collision layer. So when I'm using my my grid map over here, I can tell it what collision layer it's on. But every single mesh is on that collision layer, right? So I can't say the floor is one thing and the doorway is something else. Anything I want to do like that has to be instanced in individually. But if I have a large amount of objects like this, it'll work great. Another way we can use this, and I'm just going to bring in Godot Getaway. Godot Getaway is a course we developed, I guess we finished it last year. And it's an online, multiplayer, 3D cops and robbers car racing game, right? So the robbers are trying to go to waypoints and pick up money. And I can just show you what that looks like real quick. And the first thing we'll do is turn off the sound, just in case it's loud. And I can host a game, and let's put in a seed. Hello, toucans. Great. And yeah, well, I don't know, be a nice blue color, and we'll be cops. Great. None of that's the important bit. The important bit is the city. There we go. Because this city is not only a grid map, it's procedurally generated. What we've done is we've used a backtracker algorithm, and I'll show you some of the code in a minute, modified by Kids Can Code's 2D tile map dungeon generator code to make ourselves a little city. So all of these cars are placed procedurally, all these traffic cones are placed procedurally, the billboards are randomized, like the whole city. If you change the seed or use a random seed, you'll get a different city each time. What this means is you can actually do quite a lot with a grid map that isn't immediately obvious. So let's take a look at that code. Hey, Adrian. And I'm going to take a moment for my coffee. I'm not going to walk through every line of code. I'm just going to give you a brief example of what's happening. The first thing that's happening is we're defining these cells. So I'm defining north, east, south, west. And if that's not obvious, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open my whiteboard up and just explain what's happening here. We have a bunch of road tiles. We have a bunch of building tiles. So the first thing that's happened is we make ourselves a little grid in our grid map, because a grid map is a grid. In fact, it's not just a grid. It's what's a 3D grid called? Is there a word for 3D grid? A mega grid? Whatever. Answers in the comments. I have a drama degree. Don't at me. Answers in the comments, but don't at me. Nice. Okay, so what we're doing is we're filling all of these things with buildings with a random rotation. Okay? Then we're coming in and we're carving out the road as a single unbroken line. And then we're randomly removing some of these walls to give it more of a city feel. And we can alter how many of those walls is removed. The reason we can do that is that if we look at very professional drawing here. If we look at a single cell in our grid map, we can give these binary values. That means that any possible combination on our road, any corner, any straight line, any T-junction, any crossroad, can be expressed as a value between 0 and 15, or 1 and 16, depending on how you want to look at it. So if we've got a building, it's a mega grid. Nailed it. If we have no roads, if we have a building, that's 0, right? If we have a dead end to the north, that's 1. If we have a straight line, that's 5. If we have a T-junction facing this direction, that's 16. Is that 16? Yeah. No, it's 14. I can math. That's 14, and so on. So what we can do is we can say, okay, if we assume this is north, this is east, this is south, and this is west, we can then express it any way we like. That allows us to use a simple backtracker algorithm. Scientifically regular grids. I like that. So all we're doing is we're saying, okay, I'm leaving some spacing because I don't necessarily want my crossroads to be next to each other. That's not very realistic. I want some distance between possible turns in the road. I want the blocks to be a certain minimum length. And I've got this default map seed, which we're actually ignoring. This is just to test the map generation. The height and the width are set in the options. Ignore these plaza tiles. I'll talk about those in a minute. Ignore the cafe spots. Same deal. Okay, so what are we doing? First thing, we're filling in all our variables. Nice and easy. We are making a border. We're saying you cannot go beyond this distance, right? I don't want any roads going beyond the city limits. This is a closed map. And then what we're going to do is we're going to make our maze. So we're going to create our stack of visited and current tiles. So we're keeping track of where we've been. We're creating a blank map, which is filling every cell with a building. And we're doing some fancy things like we're saying, these are the possible cell rotations. I have to go through these manually, but basically you press S a few times. Those are my rotations. We have neighborhoods. So if you're in this part of the map, then use this tile set. If you're in this part of the map, use this tile set, whatever it is. Or use these tiles. They're all one tile set. Cartesian grid. Very nice. Although I'm not a big fan of Descartes. Different. The Cartesian split annoys me. Completely irrelevant. It does. We don't have to talk about that, but we should. All right. So we've just filled the entire map like that. And then we're just going to go in and check if we've visited there. We have a little thing here saying, are you visited? And we're checking our neighbors. It's a very simple, get your current position and check all 4 directions. And then we're just saying, has the neighbor been visited? If it has, then change its walls and our walls. We're just using those binary values. And we can carve it up every time. So every time we go into the game, we're going to get a different city. And because it's a grid map, we can get ridiculously large cities. So if I get a redonkulous size, and I'm just going to leave this blank, let's get a random city. Give it a moment. This could take a while. Here we go. Okay, so here is one city. Okay. I have no idea if YouTube is being nice with this. And we can go a bit bigger with this. There we go. And this is a truly ridiculous city. This is something like, I think this is a 5-kilometer square grid. Like, it's obscene. It was just, how far can we push this? Because this is one object, this is reasonably performant. It'll be more performant if I make it smaller. But if I run the exact same thing again, and I'm not going to change any settings, not even nighttime, even though it's much prettier, we should, oh, thank you, we should get a completely different city. probably help if I press the right button. Of course, I can't tell if we've got a completely different city because I wasn't paying attention. Looks pretty different. I may have left the normal seed in. The point is, we can use grid maps to do quite a lot of things. Grid maps don't only have to be used like this, by the way. We could also use them for things like placing greebles or bits of furniture around. If anything we want to really put everything in a nice even grid. But to make them work, there are certain things we need to do. I'm going to go back into this other project that we set up just a moment ago. Dooby-dooby-doo. This is weird. This feels like an unplanned lecture thing. Dooby-dooby-doo. What did I call it? Dooby-doo. No, I didn't call it dooby-doo. I don't know what I called it. This is great TV, I know. What was it called? There's not that many projects, Jan. I converted a 2D tile map into a 3D world using multi-meshes, and we use grid maps instead. Yeah, I mean, they're very fast. You know what? Let's just go into the RPG project. I'll just show you the little sandbox I've been making as a potential future course, which is what led to those assets in the first place. If I try and run it, OBS is going to slow it down, so it'll show as like 40 to 50 to 60 frames on my side, but you'll see about 20 frames. But if I open our grid map scene, which has a wonderful title, Castle Dungeon Tiles Test Thing short name. I don't know why I thought that was funny, but it gets less funny every time I have to type it. Okay. So with this grid map, there's a lot of things we can do. Now, things to be aware of. The more dynamic lighting you put on a grid map, the more you're going to slow the game down, because it is one object. Now, until 3.3, a single object in Godot could only have 8 dynamic lights on it at the same time. So it's a directional light, a couple of omni lights, and 5 spotlights, for example. After that, it's going to start flickering. As of 3.3, that's not true. We can now go into here, and I think it's under quality. You know, I'm just going to do a search for light. Limits. Here we go. And you can change the maximum lights per object. Be sparing with this. You could bake your grid map. And to do that, I would go into the actual assets for the grid maps, and I would change all of these for use and bake lighting, and then I'd come back and use and bake lighting. Then I would generate a UV2 and so on. The reason I'm not doing that is I want moving light sources. And if you want moving light sources, bake lights don't look great. I'm not going to give you a quick rundown on how to do bake lighting, but it is an option. If you don't want lots of moving lights, if you don't want fireballs and particles that leave moving lights around the place, and you don't want to do moving torches, if it's a fixed scene or a city or something like that, by all means bake the lighting. That said, there's a lot we can do with this. The dungeon itself is my grid map. All of these props are placed, well, mostly manually. The skulls are actually using the scatter plugin. And if I run this scene, assuming that OBS lets me do this, the whole thing feels like a one coherent world. So you can get really good results by using a grid map. I'm just checking over there. Oh, yep, it's a slideshow, isn't it? Thanks, OBS. Well, that's good. I wonder, will OBS... Yeah, it just doesn't like it. Okay, cool. Yeah, so that's exactly what I did, Spectre. I've got, for example, these doors. These doors are a separate scene, right? So I've got this door, and it's got an animation player, and that's the open animation. I haven't bothered with the close animation. It's incredibly simple. You go into the area, it triggers the animation. Yes, the whole grid map counts as one object for lights. Absolutely. So at the moment I've got it set for 64. If we have more than 64 lights on the grid map, and we're looking towards all of them, then we're going to start getting a few lights flickering. However, the odds that I'm going to be looking at 64 lights that I can see at any one time are pretty small. The more lights you add on a single object, the more it's going to slow it down, but it's probably still more performant than putting in individual walls. Anything like levers or anything like that, like over here we have this lever that activates this drawbridge, is a separate object that I've put in. I could, if I spent the time, procedurally generate this. And what I would do is I'd probably use the backtracker algorithm, or I'd use, I'd have a whole series of pre-made rooms with the deck already done as individual scenes, and I'd bring them in. But at that point, and the latter especially, I'm probably not using a grid map. You don't have to use a backtracker algorithm with a grid map. You can actually just have a dictionary of which cells fit into what category. So if you have, for instance, a bunch of rooms with a north entrance, a bunch of rooms with a south entrance, and some way of cross-referencing to say which ones are unique, which ones are common, that is a way you can do it. What you can't do is have a grid map and say, okay, here's a room. I want to have a bunch of places in that grid map where I can spawn things in. So maybe in this corner, I've got a little position 3D, and on one run, it might be these barrels, and on another run, it might be a chest, another run, it might be a goblin. However, there are ways you can get around that. So let's go back to Godot Getaway, because, oh, we believe. Is my video coming through okay? Because YouTube is giving me all kinds of errors. La 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 la. Godot? Thank you. Great. So Godot Getaway is... We'll stay with the prototype for now. And we'll bring it right back here. Awesome. Okay, sorry, I was just checking over there with Godot. So if I go back to my map maker script, in fact, before we do that, let's take a look at our tiles. So I'm going to open my city tile set. And there were a few places, like right here, where I've got this little gap in the sidewalk, in the pavement. And what I wanted was some of them, very occasionally, to have a cafe area. And that was going to be a table and a number of chairs that might spawn in. And they were all going to be rigid objects, so you could drive through them and have chairs and tables flying everywhere. Nice and dramatic for police chase. I can't obviously make that part of the grid map, because my grid map can't have rigid bodies. It must be static body, mesh, and collision. So the way I solve that is by, when I create the map, keeping a record of the grid. And as part of that record, every time we place the tiles, I will say right here, if the current tile is in the list plaza tile, so I have a list up here of all of the cells in my grid map that correspond to that plaza tile. So if it's one of these tiles, if it's in that list, let's just come back to, here we go. Then get the cell item orientation, ignoring the y-axis, because we're not going up and down on the y, we're staying on one level. You can go up on the y if you want. And then where you've got the building, get the building rotation, and then put that as a cafe spot. Then when we run the props, the object spawner, which is right here, we're going to call as across the network, you're placing cafe spots here. So I'm going to look for place cafe spots. Here we go. Place cafes. We've got a bunch of cafe spots as an array. We're going to shuffle them. And then we're just going to say, okay, get me a tile, get the building rotation, transform that grid reference into global position. So I know that the tiles are 20 across, so I need the halfway point. So I'm going to go whatever tile you are by 20, add 10. And then I'm going to add in the cafes rotated. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm getting the cell information and I'm applying the rotation of that with the cafe scene. Finally, when I got my cafe scene, which is a scene, it's not a part of the script. Sorry, this feels a little dry, but cafe. The one thing I did was I made sure the whole thing was offset. So here's my scene, here's the origin. When it places, it'll place that as the center of the building and these cafes there. So if we go into the game real quick. And you know what, let's stick with a nice small level this time. So we can actually find some things. And let's do nighttime. I feel like nighttime feels good. And let's be cops again. The spawner script is 2 miles long. This is true. There's probably a more optimal way of doing that. But right here, we have these chairs. I can drive through them and they're rigid bodies, and after a few seconds they'll despawn. There we go. Whereas I can find another one of these plazas. There's one right across the street here that doesn't have the cafe. So I've got the whole thing handled. What you need for this is the get sell things. Hey, new gaming chair. Specifically, if we look in grid map, which is... Did I keep grid map here? A bunch of functions that no one ever looks at. Specifically, get sell item orientation. And that's going to be a saving grace. So if you know what type of cell it is, and you've got a list that these are the places where I can put things, and you've got some way of tracking what the orientation of the room is, which I would use get cell orientation, you can then use a very simple script to say, okay, here are the possible places to spawn X, enemies, loot, pictures of me, and put them in. Whew. I'm so not used to doing this by myself. I'm used to bouncing off Mikey, so when I slow down, he'll jump in. Okay. A few things to look at when you're making your pieces. And to do this one, I'm going to start a new Godot project. Now, I did mention this on Monday, but, you know, different stream. Let's look at what happens when we want to bring in some free assets. Because if you're going to be using grid maps for a jam, the chances are you're going to be using some free assets. So right here, I've got the Kenny Furniture Pack. Or, you know what, let's use the Kenny Road Pack. We're going to make a new project. Which I'm going to give a very sensible name. Wait, this is 3.2. Let's open 3.3. Why do I have 3.2 and 3.3? Because I'm still finishing a course. I was recording in 3.2, and it's a really bad idea to jump between engines. Okay, let's try that again. Grid maps. Yay. Create folder. Go. Okay, so I've got these roads, and I'm not going to bring in all the roads because there's quite a lot of them, and I'm going to bring them in as GLTFs because I don't like OBJs. And let's put a new folder, and we'll call them road bits, and open in File Manager and paste. Great. Materials won't come through because reasons, but if I open one of these up, what do we have? We have stone and water. Okay, stone, we're going to make nice and grey so I can see it. And water, we're going to make nice and blue. Awesome. So here's one tile. Here's a stone tile. Here's a stone tile. Okay, things you need to know. 1, where the origin is. Now, when we place things in Godot, we're going to be placing them where this origin is. This point here is where Godot is going to think the object is. This is true for physics calculations, for any kind of physics body. So if you've got your furniture and you've got the physics, you've got the mesh offset, so that the mesh is in the corner, the origin is in the corner. When you calculate the physics on a rigid body, it's going to bounce around weirdly. And I demonstrated this the other night. I can show you again if you like. Let's actually have the right window open so I can see. What kind of course? Godot Getaway is a paid course. It's on our site. I'll actually link our site. It's not for everyone. It's an intermediate course. And I should probably remember the name of my own website, shouldn't I? Here's Canopy Games. We also have a couple of free things, including a free tips video. Here we go. Okay, so let's make ourselves a little grid map. So I'm going to make this, and I'm going to bring in all of these. Oh, I've got to do them manually, haven't I? I keep forgetting this. Okay, great. So copy that and paste it here. Copy that. You know what? I'm just going to do like a handful. I can't be bothered with this. Paste that there. You're not going to be a child of that. And let's pick a couple of really different ones. Yeah, you'll do. Copy you. We do also have a course on Udemy. In fact, Discovering Godot, which is our beginner course, is on both Udemy and on our site. If you want to get it, you can get it on either side, on either site. Let's put that. Didn't mean to open it as inherited. Open anyway. So, first thing, if you're using a bunch of assets like this, they're kind of a pain to get through, but fine. We're just going to bring them in. This is a one-time thing anyway. Okay, so here is my tiles. Here are my tiles. And let's just move them aside so we can see everything. So we just have these 4 tiles. They're not much to look at. In fact, I'm going to make the stone a little bit less ugly. Great. We have these tiles. And what I can do is I can go in and I can give them all collision shapes if I want to. I don't have to. But to convert them, it's nice and easy. I just go convert, mesh library, and give it a name. And I'm going to do dot mesh library, meshlib. The only thing this can hold is mesh, collision, navigation. Nothing else will come through. Okay, so any script you put through, any rigid bodies, any light sources, anything like that will not come through. Okay, so let's close all of these because I don't care about these anymore. And let's start a brand new scene, and I'm going to make my grid map. And I'm just going to load in that mesh library. And we have some tiles. Okay, so things to know. I can go up and down the grid with Q and E. Other thing to know, before you do anything, in order for this to work, it really helps to know what your cell sizes are. I happen to know that these are 3 by 3 by 3. Why are they 3 by 3 by 3? I have no idea. These are 3 meter long. Okay, so let's put in a couple of pieces like this, and then this flat piece, and then like that. And to make this a little bit easier to see what's happening, I'm going to put a directional light in with some shadow, just so you can actually tell these apart. There we go. Local mode. World mode. And let's give you a shadow. Boop. Yeah, that's good enough. Okay. So, remember I said the origin is in the center, and that's where Godot thinks it is. So look what happens if I start rotating pieces. So let's say I want to put these two back to back. I can't. All I'm doing is rotating on the z-axis, and it looks like they're moving. And that's because where I see this item is not where the item is. In order to make this work, I'm going to have to move the origins of all these points. There's a few different ways you can do this. You could make the static body the parent, make the mesh the child, and then offset the mesh. Pain, but you can do it. You can go into Blender, and you can either write a script, or use a plugin, or do it manually. Move the origin to the center of the object. Annoying, but doable, and then you can re-export them. If you're doing that, by the way, export them all as one scene, because it's going to make these grid maps much easier. This is probably the number one reason why using grid maps with free assets can be really problematic, because you go in and it just doesn't do what you want it to do. As I say, we can go up and down with the grid map. So if I wanted to go up a level, I could just use Q. And if I've set this up correctly, have I set this? Are you not 3 meters high? Using the middle shift and the middle mouse button to look around. Kenny, what kind of... Okay, so you're 1 meter high. Is that it? No. Don't even know what height he's using. Origin's in the wrong place. Really hard to use. So, if you're using free assets, and I like Kenny's assets a lot, I've used them in most of my courses, they're fantastic. But this is the troubleshooting. If you're making a grid map, that's the kind of thing you want to do. I would keep collisions as simple as possible. So you could go through each one of these and make a tri-mesh collision. However, the more tri-mesh collisions you have, the more difficult it's going to be. Let's try that again. I'm just going to make you a static body. There we go. So we now have this tri-mesh. But why would I do that when I could just go into here and make this a box? And already, look where the box is, right? Like, that's just not in the right place. So I can move that by 1.5. And then my extents are going to be 1.5, I guess. Oh, look at that. 1.5. And then we need to move you up some, don't we? Great. So this is going to be a lot less strain on Godot. So wherever you can, make the collision as simple as possible. If I go back into my RPG one, which is meow, 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 meow. Oh, good maps, yeah, there it is. I bet that's the one. RPG Sandbox is gone away. I just realised I'm talking you guys through things on the other monitor that you can't see. I'm a professional. I have a master's in education, you know. La 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 la. Okay, so Godot, give me that back. Don't save that. Or that. Or that. Okay, but you can bring them back over here. So let's go into our tile set. Okay. I was going to show something. Oh, right. Let's look at the dungeon tile assets. When I originally brought these forward, or brought these in, when I originally made these in Blender, exported them, and then I just went through each of these and went create tri-mesh static body, and it went and it followed every single line in here. Now there are some cases where you want very, very accurate collision. For example, if you've got a really precise shooter, or you want to be able to hide behind a tiny bit of cover. But in this case, let's just make a collision shape. I don't know how visible this is on YouTube. It's just a box, and they're all the same collision shape. Like, copy and paste it or save it as an individual shape. It just makes things much simpler, especially for things like the floor. Like, I don't actually want the character to wobble up and down every time they go over a slight crack. Yes, that's theoretically more realistic, but honestly, your brain compensates for that anyway. Like, we're not going to notice that. So let's make it flat. Make these as simple as possible. The collision on these pillars, for example, is just a series of cylinders, because I don't need it to be pixel perfect. If you do need it to be pixel perfect, that's fine, but remember that collision can be quite expensive, especially when we're looking at things like the skull room, right? These are all little rigid bodies, and I do want these to behave realistically. I want them to roll realistically, although it's worth noting, if I put the work light on so you can actually see what we're doing here. There we go. But these bones just have a square collision, because you're not going to notice the difference between a cube collision shape and a bone collision shape, because honestly they're going to behave very similarly. So keep your collisions as simple as you can. While we're here, I did mention that there is a way of getting navigation to work with a grid map. I actually did a video on this recently. And to work easily. So we've got a navigation node right here. And all I need to do, just like I do with any other static body, back, here we go. You know what, let's get rid of the lighting. I don't need to see these lights. Boop, thank you. Okay, all I need to do is get my navigation node, my navigation mesh instance as a child. I need to generate my nav mesh here. So I'll just go over here and go new. And let's make sure I can actually see this. So we have navigation mesh instance. Thank you. Okay, so we now have a navigation mesh instance with no information. Any static body that is a child of navigation mesh instance is going to show up in the navigation. So if I put the grid map in here, and then I bake my navigation, we now have a nav mesh. This is much simpler than trying to line up pixels perfectly on a grid map. I've managed to get that working almost once, and then it didn't work again, whereas this has worked for me every time. Don't forget, when you're doing this, you can go into your navigation mesh instance rather, click on the nav mesh itself, the navigation mesh, and if you go into agent, you can actually change the assumed size of the agent. So I'm going to assume the agent has a radius of 1 meter and then rebake it. And the reason I'm going to do that is to give it more space around the edge of the room and more space around the doorway. That's so that we don't clip into it, right? If you have an NPC with collision and they clip into the corner, you'll get some weird results. Whereas this way, they know how to get through the door. You'll notice this table isn't being counted in navigation because this is a rigid body. I want people to go through it. At runtime. Oh, yeah, the stair collision is a great example. I'll show you that in a minute. I haven't found a way of doing this at runtime, which does make this limited in GridMap. I think it might be possible, but I've yet to find it. Because I don't think whoever wrote grid maps was expecting us to use it in that way. Someone earlier mentioned that grid maps feel really good but underdeveloped, and I think that's probably accurate, to be honest. It's... Let me just hide this blue thing. It's really distracting. There we go. I think what happened is someone started it, put it in so it's working, and then moved on to the next project thinking either they will or someone else will come back to it. If you are somebody who's really, really good in Engine and you want to go in and write extra functionality for grid maps, there's a bunch of things we'd love to have. I suspect grid maps will be getting some love for 4.0, but I actually don't know. Now, I did have a test NPC in here, but at the moment I haven't found a way of doing baking nav mesh at runtime. If you do bake nav mesh at runtime, by the way, what I would do is I would pause the game, except for navigation and everything underneath it, and then send a signal when it's done baking the nav mesh somehow, and then use that to unpause the game, because otherwise you get some weird results. Yes, Chestnut. I mean, I felt the same way. It's one of the reasons why I didn't put NPCs in Godot Getaway. If you want procedural grid maps, you'd probably have to use a different kind of navigation solution. Like, you'd probably have to use A-Star or something rather than navigation mesh. There's probably ways around it, but don't ask me what they are. If you can get the navigation working here, because according to the documentation for grid map, if I show you, and I feel like the word navigation is in here. Oh, it's on the website, isn't it? 1 second. Here we go. Did I want this one or using? Using grid maps. I forget where they mention it, but they say, is it in here? Collision and navigation can also be added to the meshes just like you would do with the tiles of a tile map. In theory, you can add navigation to these. That would allow you to use this procedurally, like if you can get that working. However, you would have to have each navigation mesh meet perfectly with, I'm guessing the vertices would have to meet rather than just the edges. So they would have to be written in such a way that the vertices would meet absolutely. Like they would have to have no overlap whatsoever, but be touching. That's quite hard to do, and I'm not sure that's necessarily worth it in most cases. I didn't even know you could do a third party at runtime. Yes, navigation is coming with 4.0, so that might make it work a lot better with grid map. I really like grid maps. I've used them a few times. I also use them in Canopy Cars, although I don't procedure generate that. They're a great way of getting a lot of content made really quickly and of editing the level really quickly. And because the Godot game engine is a Godot game, like the Godot engine is written in Godot, well, the interface is written in Godot, we can actually expose the grid map to the player. So you could write some special code and have the player design a level. That's a great way of doing it. By the way, quick tip, don't try and use baked lighting and rebake it at runtime. I did that once. It took half an hour. Okay, so those are my basic looks at how to use this. You can also use this with furniture. You can access any of the cell information in code. You can even expose it to the player. So you can make this as versatile as you want. You can use a lot of procedural rules on it. Or you can use something very simple. So let's take a look at Canopy Cars real quick. Where's Canopy Cars? This is the in production version for the course. And here we have a grid map from Coternius and Cars from Kenny. This did mean that I had to scale things up, which means that, like, the curb is a little bit high. But it's just a really nice way of making a map. Like, it's so much easier than trying to go in and do a tweak after you've made it in Blender. You could make this in Blender, UV map it if you want to, do all that. But honestly, it's just so much more fun to be able to go in and say, oh no, this tile here is different. And in World, it's very performant. Like if I jump in, and let's just do a 1-player game, or 2-player game, or 3-player game, 4-player game. Sorry, I'm showing off now. The controls are tight. This car is a little bit too fast to drive. Collision works. Not that I'm demonstrating that very well. I've got that border wall over there. Collision works. Like, it works fine. Aknakos says, am I saying that right? I use navigation in Godot 4, and it has navigation regions which can meet and intersect, and it will find a path across the regions, but I haven't seen them anything new to rebake nav meshes for procedural terrain. So there's probably a plugin that you could use for that. I'm going to close that for a bit and go into big face mode. Boop. You're welcome. There's probably a plugin you can use for that. If you're using a different kind of navigation, like you could just write it from scratch. And that's worth saying. Like there are certain instances where, just like a multi-mesh array, there are certain cases where it's really helpful and really performant and a lifesaver. But there are certain cases where you don't want to use this, right? So if, for example, you're doing a giant open world level, you probably don't want to do this because you're going to want to do culling. You can absolutely make a giant open world, I've seen tech demos, game in Godot, but you're going to have to write your own chunking algorithm and handle that from scratch. Using a single grid map won't work because the entire object will be rendered at all times. If you want to be able to change a single texture on it, that's not a grid map thing. You'll have to bring in that item elsewhere. So in Godot Getaway, where we have lots of different colored buildings for each neighborhood, what I did was I duplicated the mesh and then gave it a new material and then brought that into the grid map. The nav mesh updating in real time. I know the navigation server can intelligently react to. I haven't played with it, but can intelligently react to obstacles. I'm wondering if overlaying that over a grid map would be good. However, this is for God of 4. I don't recommend using God of 4 in production yet. It's fantastic. I love playing with it, and the lighting changes are phenomenal. But it's it's undergoing nightly changes. It's unstable. It's looking amazing. It's unstable. There's a lot we can do with God of 3. So, reasons to use grid maps. Once it's set up correctly, or if someone sets it up, once someone has set it up correctly, it's incredibly fast. In order to set it up correctly, make sure that you've got your tiles all at the same region, and understand that every tile has to have an origin in the center. Ideally, the center bottom. When I've got all those floors and walls, the origin is actually in the same place, so I know they're going to meet perfectly. And the tiles are all 20 meters across, the walls are all 20 meters across, every wall and staircase is 6 meters high, so I know it's going to work. And because they're all in the center, when I rotate the corridor pieces, if I've got a corner piece like this, the origin is here. So when I rotate it, the origin is here. So when I rotate it, it'll rotate as a corner. I can't do that. Grid mapception. A grid of grid maps. You could absolutely have multiple grid maps lining up in a single game. I've done that with tile maps. I did that in Heistmeisters because in God of 3, you can't have layers in your tile map. I believe layers are coming in 4. So if I have furniture as part of a grid map, it'll get rid of the floor underneath it. So the only way to do that is have a second grid map to paint furniture on. Reasons not to use a grid map. At the moment, procedural navigation. Like, you're going to have to do a plug-in or work it yourself. I haven't figured out how to bake at runtime, and I haven't spoken to anyone who knows yet. It might be in there, it might be possible, but it's such an edge case that it's not in the documentation. Reasons not to use it. You need every room, every building to look absolutely unique. Like, a grid map is great for lots of very similar items. And you can get a lot of variation with very few assets. In God of Getaway, we have 2 basic buildings. And those are rotated. Each neighborhood has a different color, and each neighborhood also has 1 hero asset. So in one neighborhood, you've got a factory, and another one, you've got a car dealership. But that's 3 building types per neighborhood. Changing the color and rotating the assets and then bringing those new colors into the grid map is a great way of doing it. You can absolutely use basic procedural generation to move things around. You can even use complex procedural generation if you want to do things like weighted algorithms so that these rooms are much more likely than those rooms. Utterly doable, because all that happens is when you generate your grid map, your mesh library, it's going to take the order there on the scene tree, and that's going to be the cell number. So when you're not cell number, the tile number. So when you're painting tile number 0, that's the first one, I believe, in your list. It might be the last one. I forget which order it does it. Either way, a couple of basic tests and you'll get it right. The one really annoying thing when you're trying to do procedural generation is if you have to rotate the tiles. Because we can rotate on 6 axes, and there isn't any, they're not, I mean, it's not listed as a vector 3 or anything, you just have to know the rotation number. What that means is every possible rotation has a different integer, so you would set cell rotation 12. Unless you happen to know which cell rotations you want, I did find a graphic for it once, but it was really blurry and I can't find it anymore. You have to go through manually and do it yourself, which is what I had to do. I had to go through every single rotation and just say, yes, this one fits, no, this one doesn't. Finally, if you're making these assets in Blender, which is actually very simple, if you have basic Blender skills, or if you're working with somebody in the jam that has very basic Blender skills, it is trivially easy to make a whole bunch of assets that are the same size and fit, but make sure that the scale and the rotation and the translation are all applied. Because if you bring in an asset and, like with the Kenny stuff, right, it was off to the side and I generated the collision and it was over back in the center. If I had used that as was, even if I dragged the collision over, the grid map is not going to remember me dragging the collision. So the collision is actually going to be over there. And we found this out when we started working on Godot Getaway, because Mikey made a new building and he hadn't applied the transform. So the collision was below the building, which meant that when I was driving, if I skid off the road, I would just fall off the map. So make sure the origin is in the right place, and this is true for anything. And in fact, I'm going to show you a very simple example of how Godot's physics, well, how origins are important. So if I just make a brand new project and give you guys my picture again, let's call you, you know what, we can actually use this grid map scene. I don't need a new project. And let's open the furniture pack. And we have DAEs, even better. Let's use some DAEs. I'm going to bring all, I'm not going to bring all of them, that's silly. Let's bring a double bed and the textures. Actually, let's just bring the double bed, I don't care about the texture. Great, single DAE, good to go. So, here is my bed. Observe where this is. Now, at the moment, these are all meshes, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a rigid body. Actually, I'm just going to change this to a rigid body. So let's change type to rigid body. And I'm just going to... Really, that covers it? Okay, fine. I'm just going to generate collision mesh here. Let's just make it a nice simple one. So we're going to single collision sibling. Great. Okay, so we have that. Let's get rid of the animation player. Don't need you. Just typing over here to keep an eye on chat. And let's save as. So save as possessed bed. Why is it called possessed bed? This will all become clear. New 3D scene. Let's make a floor. So I'm going to make a static body. It's going to have a mesh instance. And it's just going to be a floor. So let's use a box, which is commonly hidden as a cube. And extents of 10 by 0.1 by 10. There we go. 10 centimeter thick floor. Perfect. And let's give that a material so it's not so hard on the eyes. New spatial material with an albedo. That's a nice dark grey colour. And a collision shape. That's going to be a box shape. That's going to be 5 by 0.25 by 5. Wait. Oh, right. There we go. And we'll call you level. Let's bring in a camera so we can see what we're doing. And let's bring in our bed friend. Okay. So what do we have here? We have a static body, and we have a rigid body, which is facing the wrong way, so we just turn that. And we have a camera. Let's make sure the camera can see what we're going to see. Nope, there's a terrible angle. Let's come on over here. Great. Even greater. And we're just going to make that current. Okay, so we have a static body with collision. We have a rigid body with collision. I expect the bed to fall slightly and land. Here's what's actually going to happen. Oh, I need to save this, don't I? Is this called level? It's called level. Great. I mean, I suppose it'll get you out of bed in the morning. But dude, so why is this happening? This is the same as the tiles not being where we see them, right? So if we take a look at our possessed bed, as far as Godot is concerned, the physics body is here, right? That's where all the physics calculations are. Effectively, that's our center of gravity. Good question, Michael. I'll take a look at that. If I take all of these and then I move them to where I expect physics to be working from, about here, say, and then I do it, my bed will land just fine, right? It's just fall to the ground and behave like a bed. Godot is always going to assume that the object, or the node you're talking about, is where the gizmo is. So if you've got things at the corner, you're going to get unexpected results. Just like we did with the grid maps, right? So when we're using the Kenny grid map assets, when we, let's put them in here. What do we call this? No, I just need to add a grid map. What am I doing? It's the first time, clearly. Wait, can Godot even do 3D? Okay, so we have our grid map, and I'm just going to put some tiles in. Bip. And let's rotate this one. Doesn't work. Because the tile is where the center is. So I'm not actually putting a new tile in a new position. I'm putting the same tile rotated. Michael, when should you use grid maps? If you want, a way of painting a 3D level very quickly. If you noticed Adrian, or if you saw Adrian's video where he was challenged to remake that snail platforming game, I think it was called Will You Snail? I forget the name of it. He did it in grid maps. He was able to create the level very, very quickly. 2, if you want large levels that are quite performant, rather than bringing in every single mesh, you can use a mesh library, which means that you're only really doing one draw call per mesh type, as opposed to, you know, if you've got 20 buildings, but there's only 3 types, you don't really need to be doing 20 draw calls. You could do 3 draw calls. And also just to show off and say, hey, look what I can do, and paint a level and put it up on as a dev blog, and everyone goes, oh, this is so good. Anytime you want to do a lot of stuff like that, you can bake the tiles in your mesh. So if I go into my mesh library, I can go into these and I can bake them use them in bake lighting. Exactly the same way you would do with normal bake lighting. Also use that and make sure that each mesh has UV2 unwrapped. So if I go into my bed, for example, I can show you how that looks. I'm going to do geometry, not geometry, I'm going to bake light. Here we go. Using bake lighting, and then I'm going to go to my mesh, unwrap UV2 for light map AO, and then you can bring in your light map and just bake the lighting. Like, that'll work just fine. At the moment I have no lights in, but if I did, and I did bake lighting, I'd get much better looks. Do not do this if you are using any kind of moving light or dynamic light, or if the object is going to be moving, because it's going to look weird. Okay, so with that, let's go back to Big Face. I'm really sorry that my tone is kind of fast right now. Ooh, and I've gone dark. Oh, the sun's going down. I can fix that. Do-do-do-do-do-do. Boo. No, that's sharpness. That's gain. There we go. Ha! Ooh, that's going to slow me down, isn't it? Okay, let's go back to here and just do this one. There we go. Less latency. Awesome. Okay, so that's my sort of quick impromptu lecture on how to use grid maps. I think grid maps are absolutely fantastic. They are not great for everything. If you need a bunch of unique assets, they're not good. If you want a giant procedural world, there's going to be a point where having one object as a single draw call is going to be a problem, because the objects on the farther side of the map are still going to be visually instanced. If you need procedurally baked navigation, or navigation at runtime, baked at runtime, I don't know how to do that. I've not figured that out yet. I'm guessing it's possible, but someone said there was a plugin for it. I think it was Chestnut. Chestnut Puck, did you say there was a plugin for it? If you want players to design their own 3D levels and you want to expose the level design to them, grid maps are a great way of doing that. They do take a little bit of getting used to with the control system, though, because you can't use, once you've selected a tile, A, S, and D won't move your camera or your viewpoint. They'll just rotate the object on an axis. Let there be light. But while we're there, any questions, comments, thoughts, concerns, interpretive dances, or comments about my dragon? Sorry, cat. Caboodle is very annoyed. I just woke her up. Oh, it doesn't work with the grid map node. Oh, interesting. Oh, I see. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Sorry, I'm reading Chestnut Puck's solution. Yeah, if you're using the navigation mode, you can absolutely use navigation mode with grid map, but not if you need to bake it at runtime. I don't know how to bake navmesh at runtime. Has anyone actually fixed that? Let's take a look. Godot bake navigation at runtime. Maybe someone fixed it while I was doing it. That's from 2019. That's from 2018. That's from 2019. Yeah, I think we have to wait for navigation server to see if it'll work. Meanwhile, if you guys haven't checked it out already, you should check out this bunny, the interpretive dance. Okay, we'll do an interpretive dance about grid maps. I have a Master's of Science in Education. Theatre education, admittedly, but it's still an MSED. I'm just watching the replay of myself. You know, I lived in America for 11 years and they wouldn't let me vote. It's kind of amazing, isn't it? So, if you guys sign up for the game jam, which I really recommend you do, either solo or with a team, I would encourage you to play in 3D. We've got a stream that aired a couple of days back about little tips on how to make Godot work in 3D. Grid maps are a great way of doing it. If you've prepared the assets to work with Godot, right? If you've got the origin in the right place and the sizes are sensible, then you'll be fine. Whenever I try and use Kenny assets out the box, for example, because the origins are in the corner, because he's assuming you're going to use vertex snapping, and because grid maps aren't a thing in, for example, Unity or Unreal, so there's no point designing around it. I can't use them properly because when I try and rotate the wall, everything goes off. However, there is a comment I get a lot. I get it on Facebook, I get it in questions on Discord, and that is, I didn't think Godot can do 3D. Godot can do 3D just fine. How did you build all your mesh permutations for your grid map library? Blender script? No, in fact, it's a great question. I'll show you that. What we did, I'm just going to bring up the whiteboard. Especially what Godot hangs. Stop it. Thank you. Bringing up my whiteboard. And probably share my screen. That feels like a useful thing, doesn't it? We'll do that. Let's share my screen. Do, boop. And there's my face. Awesome. Okay, so what we did was we figured out the standard, we're using a backtracker algorithm, right? So 1, 2, 4, 8. These are the numbers of these walls. And we're going to remove the walls when we need to. So if we know that there's a cell here and a cell here, if we are here and we're trying to figure out what's going on over here, if I know there's a cell here that I want to get to, I could tell Godot, on this side, please remove wall 2, and on this one, please remove wall 8, right? So that tells us that all we really need to do is get Mikey, who made the Blender assets, to make road shapes based on the binary. So if we've got 1, 2, 4, and 8, well, we don't have to make the standard building, but we do need to make this dead end, that's 1, and this dead end, that's 2, and this corner, that's 3, and this dead end, that's 4. And we just work our way through, right? That's 5, that's 6, this T-junction is 7, that's 8, and you just work through until you get all the permutations. There are 15 possible permutations, if you're not, well, 16 with 0. And you quickly get to them. So that was 8, here's 9, here's 10, here's 11, here's 12, What did I get to? 12? 8 and 10. No, that's not 12, Jan. What are you doing? That is... It's 12. It's fine. It's 13. Everything is fine. That's 14. I knew that. And that's 15, right? And that's your roadmap. That's exactly what you need. So when we made them, what I did was in fact, let me show you Godot Getaway real quick. I'm so used to having someone else in the stream to handle the questions and fill in the dead air while I open things. Godot Getaway prototype. I'm a little teapot covered in jam. This is a song that was written by Jan. Come on. There we go. Great. So let's go to our tiles. Okay. So I've got them in the right order, and that is important, right? So the crossroad, which is no walls, we actually did it the other way around. So we're blocking off walls, we're numbering those. So this crossroad is the first in the scene tree. So that's going to be item 0. Then 1, then 2, all the way down. We get all of them done. After which, we start putting our buildings in. When I did the script for the map maker, all I needed to do was say, okay, when we were placing these tiles, just place them. When I'm doing the walls, I need to clamp between 0 and 15. Because anything over 15 is a building, so you're not allowed to go over 15. And then, I could do neighborhoods by just keeping track of what cells are there, keeping track of which building tiles could have tables and chairs outside. So it's just the order you put them in the grid map is the secret. Knowing that the grid map is going to maintain this order makes everything much easier. Weirdly, and this might not be the case anymore because we're using an older version of Blender because it was 2 years ago. Mikey put all of these in order in his scene and then he exported them. They came jumbled for me, but that's how you could do it. It's as long as you can count to 15 and then name sensibly, you're fine. We also have this blank piece here just in case you don't want a building piece. I don't know why we do. So yeah, those are my assets. And then when you jump in game, it actually looks better in the course version, but let's call this high. Great. Do it nighttime, and let's change the color just because I can. Oh, that's a horrible color. A brown car. Yes, in my dungeon resource pack, I assembled them all in Blender. I didn't write a script. You could absolutely write a script. I don't know Blender's script engine well enough to really sit down and do it. It was easier for me to make them. But honestly, the only thing that really counts for is the corridors, right? And I'll show you why. In the dungeon asset thing I've got, sure, we'll open you. I'm not assuming that each room is going to be a grid map piece. So let's open up the grid map. Actually, let's open up the assets. Much easier. So I've got a bunch of floors and a bunch of walls. They're all the same size. So this is 20 by, well, it's 20 by 0.5 by 20. This is 20 by 6 by 0.5. Same with the doors. And the only thing that I really need permutations of, and these are just different brick patterns, are these 4 corridor pieces, because I can rotate them. Now, if I wanted to do a procedure-generated thing with these corridors, I would have to make copies of them, and then rotate them the right way and get that rotation to stick. But if I'm not doing that, if I'm making a bunch of pre-made rooms, saving those and then bringing those into a grid map, then I don't need that many permutations. Yes, the mesh library does need it to be one single mesh. So in that case, you would need to do it in Blender. But if you're comfortable with Blender enough to make some simple walls and so on, it's really not that big a deal. Like, these pieces are, like, I'm pretty proud of them. I think they do a good job, and they look great in first person or third person, especially with the right lighting. But, I mean, if you know what you're doing, you could make this in a couple of hours. You know, if you don't know what you're doing, this is just time you don't need to be spending. I think the props is where this pack actually becomes more valuable, but I'm not trying to sell it to you, so don't know how I'm justifying that. La 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 la. Let's bring me back to big face mode. Boop. Any other questions, thoughts, comments, more interpretive dances? I've got to wait for people to type. I'm a little teapot covered in snow. Okay. Meanwhile, folks, I'm going to start wrapping this up unless any more questions come in. If you want to check out our stuff, you can check us out on canopy.games. If you want to check out any of our demos, just show some of the kinds of things that you could be making quite quickly. For example, I made Canopy Cars as a demo in a couple of days. I think I made zoo blocks in a day. Let's go over to my dashboard. Here we go. Oh, some questions. I'm glad you enjoyed it, Chestnut. Spectre, what exactly brought you to Godot in the first place? Oh, this story again. Okay. So, my background is theatre. I grew up backstage. Both my parents worked in opera and ballet. I used to be a stage manager, wearing Nine Inch Nails t-shirts and headbanging while calling the cues for Donizetti. Because Donizetti is pretty metal. A few years back, it's been about 2017, I was watching YouTube, and I was watching a video in which a purple monster tries to convince a 7-year-old girl he's a bunny through the medium of song. The song is called I Think I'm a Bunny. It's one of the greatest songs ever written. Mostly because there's a 7-year-old going, you're not a bunny. I think I'm a bunny. You're not a bunny. I think I'm a bunny. I think I'm a bunny. I think I'm a bunny. Great. At the end of which, YouTube recommended something called Godot Engine by The Happy Cat. To which I said, well, I like happiness. I like cats. And Waiting for Godot is one of my favorite plays. Let's see what this is. So I watched the video and it looked pretty interesting. So then I thought, I wonder if I could learn to make a game about a purple bunny. So I went and found some tutorials by some person called Heart Beast. Ben is a lovely guy, by the way. He's really lovely. And learnt enough to get a demo going. I thought, well, this looks interesting. So I spoke to a guy I knew who ran a company that made courses. So I think you should teach this engine. He said, I don't know how. I said, then I'll do it. And that's how I learned. That was actually my first time coding as well. While placing things in map done in grid map, would you prefer position it normally in the world or maybe make a smaller grid map for objects? Bear in mind that any object you place in the world in grid map will have to stay there. Like, it can't be a rigid body, it can't be interacted with, it's just a decoration. So I think that really depends on what you need to do, but grid maps are pretty performant. Is the jitter issue when a kinematic body walks across a grid fixed, or is there a special workaround? Well, the first thing is make sure if you're using move and slide, make sure you're using the full parameters. Don't just use move and slide motion up. You want stop on slope, which I think is move and slide vector 3 up, and then motion vector 3 up, and then true. I found that's helped a lot, because what tends to be happening, especially if your collision shapes aren't perfectly aligned and you're using a capsule, is you'll get that little rounding bit and it'll try and slide between them. Position objects on the map. It really depends. I mean, a grid map is going to be a lot less organic. If you want to place a lot of things, I would actually recommend the scatter plugin, which is fantastic and uses multi-mesh arrays unless you tell it not to, which is great. So on the overland version of that project, where we have a forest, all of the greenery is it's 4 meshes and a scatter plugin and generate 10,000 plants. It was pretty wholesome, wasn't it? I'm losing a lot of goth points. Yeah, I mean, there are a few issues with grid maps that make them a little fiddly to use. I mean, the one that gets me every time is I can't use WSAD, and the workaround is just click off the grid map, move to a new position, click on the grid map. Not being able to bake navigation at runtime, it's annoying, but you can work around it. Once you realize that the grid map counts as a static body for the purposes of navigation, it's actually much easier to get navigation in your game. You're not limited to a single plane. All the examples I've shown you, my grid is on a single plane. It doesn't have to be. You can absolutely have multiple levels, and you can make quite complicated levels like this very quickly. Because grid maps have collision, they'll work great with physics, so any kind of friction material or anything like that you want to put in there. If you want to make a soccer game in a dungeon, go for it. There's a lot of stuff you can do, and I really recommend spend some time over the next day or so, or a few days, playing with grid maps and making them your own, because that way, when the theme for the jam is announced, you could do some awesome stuff. Like, you can really put together amazing levels very quickly. And the example, I mean, if I just show you my desktop, like, you guys saw the assets, right? But these are those same assets. It's just the lighting. And all I've done is I've picked a certain color palette from low spec, and I've just made sure the lighting and the shadows and the ambient light are all in palette, and that's it. That's how you make the game look good. Like, you can handle it. I'm not even using baked lighting at this point. So, I will give it a minute or so for any further questions, comments, thoughts, concerns, jingles, anecdotes. Do check out the Godot Game Jam. By all means, reach out. I absolutely love it to reach out. In fact, this whole project started because I was looking at some plugins that I didn't know how to use, wondering if I should put plugins in a course. And then it was like, I kind of want to make some assets for this, so I made these assets. I'd love to see the plugin you're working on, by all means. If you want to, you can reach us on our Discord. Here's our Discord. Ooh, I've got a message from Mikey, who's passed out on the sofa. He's asking how it went. I don't know. I'm doing it. I don't know how it went. Let's get you guys an invite. So one moment, please. Generate new link. Great. Hey, Oliver. Discord is probably the best. I mean, I check the Twitter every few days. Facebook, I hate using Facebook. I hate using Twitter, to be honest. I'm 45. I can't be having with it. Discord is probably the best way. Or leave a comment here, or a Twitter DM would be fine. Like, I'll make sure to check it. Smoke signals, lean out the window and shout. Yes. Join Godot Jam. I posted the thing. You should actually go join it. The partners are incredible. Check out the rest of the streams. I forget who's up next. Let me just check who's up next. I can probably just ask Adrian, but I'm going to go look. I think it's ACB. Oh, nice. Join Godot Jam. Practice with grid maps. Play with 3D. Like, I fully expect... Oh, why am I not showing my own face? I fully expect a lot of very good 2D games, especially quick little puzzle games and platform games and things like that. And those are fantastic. Those should absolutely be there. But you know what? Play with grid maps. Play with 3D lighting. Play with shaders if you know how to use shaders. And you'll be amazed how quickly you can put something together. Because Godot is a really fast engine. Like, you can make things very quickly. GDScript is very versatile, and the 3D is great. And some people like 2D. And, you know, if 2D is your thing, then great. I'm glad you joined us. Yep, there's a program button, isn't there? I could show people what to do that. I'm so used to Mikey doing it. Boop. Meanwhile, my name is Jan. I'm from Canopy Games. Hello. My favorite color is infrared. I like long walks on the books. No, I'm going to go cook some dinner and play with the cats, and then do some work, and pack my house up. Folks, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Adrian, for putting this whole thing together. Don't forget, you can actually mix 2D and 3D in the same game. You can have 2D in 3D. You can have 3D in 2D. You can, you know, put up monitors and control things and all the rest of it. Folks, it's been a real joy. Check us out. Check out our packs if you want to. Check out our courses if you feel like it. Check out our partners' stuff. Go sign up for the jam. And yeah, I'll see you in the next video. Bye.